Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? Welcome to Banff Compass. For those of you that don't know me, and for everybody online across Canada and across North America, just like Hockey Night in Canada, here we are from coast to coast to coast. I'm Scott Dexheimer. I'm the chair of the AFP Foundation for Philanthropy Canada. And we're very pleased that we could partner with the Calgary and Area Chapter and Banff Compass to offer what we call Live from Banff Compass, which is a national webinar education series that we do to make sure that we can offer free education to people who aren't able to come here. Because of course there's fundraisers in all reaches of our country, and we're so pleased to be doing this. To let you know, again, with a webinar, we're going to be handling this a little bit differently as well. So just to let you know, all questions will be with handheld so that people online can hear questions really well. Saves us from repeating questions. We'll also be accepting questions from Twitter. So for those of you online and in the room, if you wish to tweet your questions, please use the hashtag Banff Compass. That's the hashtag Banff Compass that you're going to be using throughout this whole event that we're going to be monitoring for questions that we can use for June. I want to do a special thanks before we get going today, and it's to a partner that we have with the AFP Foundation for Philanthropy Canada. This is our third year that Mackenzie Investments has helped make sure that we can offer these types of learning opportunities for people. So if we could just have a round of applause for Mackenzie Investments. So they're an education partner for us. They offer a significant amount of support for scholarships and bursaries. So if any of you have received scholarships and bursaries from the foundation, much of that is thanks to Mackenzie Investments, and we're really appreciative of their support. The other group I want to thank is our Every Member campaign donors. Many of you are in this room. Across Canada, about 25% of our members give to the Every Member campaign. And last year, 300 donors were part of our Alpha Society, which is our monthly giving program, that really makes sure that we can plan for events like this in the long term and offer those sustainable programs and initiatives that can help fundraisers across the country. So a special shout out to those Alpha Society members, monthly givers, and all of you can become a monthly giver as well, should you choose. Just a little bit about structure today before I introduce June. There will be structured Q&A today, again, to help us with online. So June will take some breaks for questions and answers, about 10 minutes at each time, twice in the middle and once again at the end. So there'll be lots of time for questions. I want you to know that. And we'll be managing those questions throughout. But thank you very much. It's my pleasure to introduce June Bradham. Welcome, June. June is the chairman and founder of Corporate Development, an organizational development and fundraising consulting firm. Under her leadership, Corporate Development has served over 200 nonprofits across the U.S., international clients from Australia, Turkey, United Kingdom, and Eastern Europe. They have directed campaigns of $2 million and over $1 billion, succeeding an organizational turnaround, resulting in a shared view of philanthropy. Recognized for her expertise in strategic planning, innovative fundraising, and board dynamics, June is an internationally sought-after speaker at such prestigious conferences as AFP International, AHP, CASE, CASE Europe, and Blackbaud's Conference for Nonprofits. June writes a monthly column for the Charleston Regional Business Journal and was named the journal's most influential woman CEO. June's groundbreaking and insightful book on board dynamics, The Truth About What Nonprofit Boards Want, The 9 Little Things That Matter Most, was published by Wiley and is fast becoming one of the industry's most talked about books. Of course, we volunteer too. And June's volunteer service includes a number of healthcare and education boards, community organization boards, like the Spoleto Festival and the Community Foundation, as well as the Chambers of Commerce. She was a past president of the board of the South Carolina Association of Nonprofit Organizations, as well as AFP International and the University of South Carolina's Moore School of Business, the top-ranked business school. She was recently selected to join the international board of Create-a-thon, known for serving nonprofits through pro bono professional work. She joins fellow board members from companies such as BMW, Hewlett-Packard, Netscape, showing her ability to stay in front of the curve of trends. June holds a bachelor's degree from Columbia University and a CFRE, and has completed the Harvard University Governance Education Program in Cambridge, Massachusetts. June, welcome to Banff Compass.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Hello, friends. I feel like am I I'm mic'd, I hope. I feel like I've really gotten to know so many of you while I'm here, so thank you for a warm Canada welcome. I actually bought a Canada pin, a flag, last night, and then I put on my brand new jacket this morning, and I didn't have the heart to punch a hole in it. So forgive me for not wearing my pin, but I do have it in my pocketbook, and I will show it to you at the break. I am thrilled to be here. This is one of my favorite topics. And what we're talking about today is, are you ready? We're not going to talk about how to run a capital campaign. We're going to talk about the readiness, which is actually the hard part. Because if you're ready, it's easy to run a capital campaign. Also, for those of you who may not be going into campaign, this information is equally as good for you if you're looking at your annual fund, if you're looking at a plan giving program, if you're looking at a new organization or one that you're ready to turn around in some way. And so I hope that you'll find this valuable no matter where you are in your process. I'd like to ask a question. You know, so often I'm standing here, for those of you on the webinar, looking at the most beautiful mountains I've ever seen. And so I'm really glad the audience is faced this way, because it would be devastating to be faced that way. And I'm sure that there are a few of you over here on this side that are doing that just for that reason. But when we think about a capital campaign, you may be thinking about it being just as difficult as climbing Mount Logan. That would be quite a challenge. How many of you in the room have done that? Okay, so it is a challenge. What we're looking at, how many of you are actually thinking about going into campaign? How many of you are currently in a campaign? Okay. How many of you want to just throw up if you think about going into a campaign? Okay, so we have a broad array of feelings here and interests maybe. What I'd like to do is take the fear away. And the fear is always gone when you're ready, right? If you're getting ready to climb Mount Logan, I hope you have practiced climbing a mountain before. And so this is no different. This is just getting ready, finding your mountain legs, and getting ready to climb. So when we look at where, you know, are you ready, there are going to be several things that we're going to talk about in particular today. So I'm going to go through first just what are those things. I'm just going to name them for you. And then I'm going to go back and talk about each one of those in a little bit of depth. I'm also going to be able to bring to you some proprietary research that you may not have seen before, that may give you some confidence when you go back to your organizations on taking this message back, on the readiness factors, because I'm finding in my world when I walk into a boardroom, if I can prove something, much like I was over in Guy's session today about metrics, you know, if you can prove it, it's really hard for somebody to argue with you. And I have been in your shoes. I was an executive director of a foundation, a fundraising foundation for years, before I spent the last, I know you don't know that I'm this old, but the last 30 years with this company. So there are, one of the things is awareness. Now, awareness is internal and external, and we'll go into a lot of details on that. Another real key ingredient, of course, is the case for support. Yesterday, I did a session on developing your case for support, and we were able to go into depth. I also noticed that you had storytelling sessions. You had a wide variety of things. The case for support is important. Again, no matter what kind of fundraising you're doing, you've got to have a document, whether it's just an outline or it's some beautiful four-color something that really explains who you are and why you exist and what is it you want for their hard-earned money. The next is donors. You really can't do this. We can't do our job without donors. And we're going to talk a good bit about that. And then leaders, you know, not just people who are going to give, but people who are going to lead. I've had a number of one-off conversations with those of you in this room over the last couple of days about leaders, and a lot of you are worried about that piece. How are you going to transition leaders into being very effective leaders? And is that okay in your culture? And I will say, maybe in North America, in America, people think we have all this leadership. Well, believe me, there are many pockets where the leadership is not there. We still have a long way to go. If you're Johns Hopkins University, you're in pretty good shape. If you're in Cornell, you're in pretty good shape. Sometimes when you get down, we're all in the same game together. There's not a lot of difference. And so then, of course, we've got to have a plan. You've got to have a plan of action. And that plan of action, again, doesn't matter whether it's a capital campaign, no matter what you're doing, that solid plan is critical. And it's kind of not okay to pull the rabbit out of the hat. Sometimes we can do that. But it's really wonderful when we know exactly what we're doing, when we're going to do it, and of course we've always got to be ready to do a little tap dance and change it as it goes along. So what I'd like to do is talk first about public awareness. And when I say public awareness, I don't really mean public. What I really mean is the people that need to know for a fundraising, not necessarily for use of your services. We're talking about two different messages here. But for fundraising, we are really talking about your internal audience first. There is no more awareness that is more important than the people within your organization and the volunteer leadership that leads that organization. So public awareness is quite important, and we're going to talk about the measure of that. So let me talk about why awareness is so important. And this is going to be, I hope, a little bit of an aha for you. It certainly was for me. Our company several years ago had 2 PhDs on staff, and I was very curious about what drives success. Why is it when I look at certain organizations, I see the same board members sitting there, right, across board meetings? Why is it that some of those leaders, you can't shut them up about that organization? They are going to be at everything. They're going to be at every board meeting. They're going to talk to everybody on the golf course and at a cocktail party and at dinner and at the break at work about what your organization is doing. And yet that same board member or same leader has a very different behavior in another setting. They don't show up. They send their company employees to your gala. They don't come to your retreat. They give you the minimum amount of money. So what is it that drives success in a fundraising organization? That was my question. And so I'm going to give you just snippets out of that seem to be pertinent to this. So when I'm talking about internal awareness, that's where we're focused right now, is the internal awareness and how critical that piece is. So let's look at this. What we did is the first number that you see right here is a correlation factor. Correlation means when one thing goes up, another thing goes up. It's not causal. It's just, if it's hot in the summer, people eat more ice cream, right? It goes up. There's a correlation factor. The second figure right here is a probability theory. It's a probability number. So in probability, what we try to do is take the best probability you can get is 0.0000. So you can see on these, you've got a very low probability that this information that I'm telling you is a fluke, and you have a very high correlation that there's a correlation between the facts. I didn't want to go too much into that. Now, would you please pick your heads up from that? Okay. All right. It took me about 6 weeks for these PhDs to teach me to say that, and I'm really proud. Did I do a good job? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So number one is, do you have a major gift emphasis? Is your organization focused on major gifts? Do you have enough money in your budget to run your program? Do you have enough staff? Do you have enough budget? And all of this, of course, will be downloadable so you don't really have to take all these notes, but you can. One of the things that I thought was most interesting was not how cute and adorable and how well the foundation staff or the development staff is, but it's how many face-to-face visits do they make with a donor. It's simply a numbers game. Now, it's a relationship, but you can't form a relationship if you're not making a visit. So, that's a 6-6 in correlation. Very high probability that that is not a fluke. Then moves management. All of you are familiar with that term, and that's how you're moving people along. So that's the internal operations. That's the staff operations part. Is the staff aware, and are they practicing best practices in the development field? Okay? Did I prove it to you? Do you believe me? Yes. Okay. All right. So here's the next thing. Ta-da! The number one predictor of success in a fundraising organization is the amount, not percentage, the amount of giving by the governing board of the organization. The amount, not the percentage. Now, amount is variable. If you are the University of Alberta and you are raising $1 billion, the amount of giving by that governing board and their foundation boards and the various circles that go out in universities, that amount is going to be much higher. If you are an organization that is raising $500,000, that amount is going to be much lower. So the capacity of your leadership does not have to be as high in organizations that aren't raising as much money. So don't feel like you've got to go be the United Way of the World board. You can be right-sized in your donor capacity to your organization. So don't let this make you gag, because it shouldn't. But you should be having and recruiting and cultivating board members with the capacity to give. Hold on, don't run out the door. My feeling is, and this is June's feeling from almost 40 years of doing this, and when things work well, your internal volunteer leadership should be giving you 20% of what you raise at a minimum. When 20%. So that's not an impossible figure. I know, how many of you have volunteer groups that are giving 20% now? Good, good for you. So it does work. I can tell you that if you start out with that premise in mind, and if you start 2 years ahead of your campaign or back up a little bit or, you know, recruit some more people in who can help, which is the way to solve it sometimes, is start thinking about that level of readiness. Because if you start with the end in mind, you're going to back into having things done right. So this is a big statement in terms of the number one predictor of success. Look at this, 0.00 probability that what I just told you is a fluke. I'm not making this up. It's fact. We know it from experience, don't we? Isn't it so much easier when you've got people with the capacity and are ready to give it to you and they really are excited about you and they don't think just giving you their time is enough? Because it's not. It's simply not if you want to be successful in your fundraising. I mean, if you don't want to be successful in your fundraising, don't worry about this. Okay, so what is it that drives that board? Why do they do that? Why would a board ever do that in the first place? Well, what you've got is, again, in this awareness sector of readiness, is the reputation. I did, in the book that I wrote, that there's a little card on your table about what nonprofit boards run. It came out of this research because I wanted to know from a qualitative standpoint if indeed what I just told you is true, and it is, then why would they do that? Well, one of the predictors is, does your organization have a good reputation? Are they proud to be with you? Are they proud to say they're on your board? Do they smile and stand up straighter when they talk about it? Do their eyes twinkle a little bit when they're talking about your organization? What about their fellow board members? What I found is that in the fellow board members, it's not a snobby thing, but when they look to their left and their right, they want to know that there's somebody there that they know or they want to know and that they believe will carry the bucket of water, that they will do the work that is necessary and they can count on them. And they know that that's a 20% rule, that there are about 20% of them that will do it. Well, that's our fault. It's not their fault. If your board is not performing, it is not the board's fault. It is our fault that boards are not performing or that we had the wrong people hired in the first place. So here's the other aha, and I'm going to go back to this in a minute, which is the alignment between the fundraising and the strategic priorities of the organization. It's amazing how difficult that is sometimes in our organizations to get that all aligned, because sometimes as fundraisers, they're patting us on the head and saying, aren't you nice? You know what, we need $10 million, just go do it, right? And that lack of strength of cohesiveness among the strategic plan, the staff, the community, and the cause is staggering sometimes. One of the other things that really drives the awareness is the CEO's visibility in the community. Are they visible in the community? Are they speaking frequently and often about the vision and mission and the importance of the work? That really drives the success if you have an admired CEO. Also about talking with the employees. I was working with one CEO at a hospital who became very interested. He really began to get this philanthropy thing. And he was deep into employee satisfaction. He actually was able to analyze, their employee giving was off the charts. Their employees gave over $3 million a year. $3 million a year, it was just amazing. And so we began to look into the why of that. He could tell you, in terms of patient satisfaction and employee satisfaction, on the east wing of the hospital on floor 4 in rooms da-da to da-da, if patient satisfaction and employee satisfaction went down, so did the giving. So he was able to do some really in-depth research that was fascinating. So and one of the things he found was that a supervisor needed to talk frequently if they were having employee morale problem. Were they there for the right mission? That was the first part of the discussion. Do you believe in our mission? Do you want to stay here because we have a mission? Not, aren't you bad because you didn't answer that buzzer on time? But if you believe in our mission, then of course you're going to answer that buzzer on time. So all of this ties in together. So you see the readiness is not just in your bailiwick, right? You know that. It's how it all ties together. So that's the awareness part. So just to make all that fit is that if the number one predictor of success is the amount of giving by the governing board of the organization, they have to be aware. They have to understand. They have to respect their fellow board members. They have to believe in your cause. There has to be a respect for the reputation of your institution. That's what drives that love of the organization, and that's what drives the awareness by that board that's so important. Okay, so now we go to the case for support. Well, the first thing I would ask is, do you believe that your organization has a vision that will attract the kind of gifts that you need? Need to take a good hard look at that. If that's questionable to those around you and in your organization, maybe you need to do a little work on that. Maybe it's a simple retreat. Maybe it's simply sitting and asking people. You don't always need a consultant to ask people questions. You can ask them questions. They may not always tell you because they might hurt your feelings. But you can ask them questions. Do you believe in our vision? How do you feel about it? Does this make you tingle just a little bit? That's why we're in this sector. Do we have credible information about what it is that we're ready to do. So how much, for whatever your project is, let's say that you're building a new building, how much of that are you going to have to earn? How much are you going to borrow? And how much are you going to be given? And what exponentially better is going to happen because of the be given part. If somebody's going to give you their hard-earned or inherited money, why are they going to do that? And that's really the function of the case for support. So within that case for support, you want to be able to describe, you know, we're pretty strong, so we're coming a third of the way, or a half of the way, or 10% of the way, or maybe we won't do this at all unless we don't have the funding to do it, which is also a very compelling reason. Most often in dealing with some hospice houses that we have raised money for over the years, there's no budget, and they know that they're not going to earn the money back. So it's, if you want this, 100% of this has to come from philanthropy. So budget is very important. I know this kind of sticks in the craw, it sticks in my craw, that we always have to be magic and compelling. Andrea and I were driving up here, and one of the things so I asked the question, if money were no object and 5 years from now you could do anything in the world with your life, what would you do? I mean, my husband used to roll his eyes at that and say, oh, why do you ask those questions all the time? But, you know, it made for interesting, at least for me, it made for interesting conversation. And she said, you know what I would love to do is I would love to give to unexciting not-for-profits. Yeah. Right? I mean, wouldn't that be neat if you didn't have to be so exciting? Well, tough. We have to be exciting. So we have to find some way to make it, you know, woohoo, it's something new and different. Okay, so what is that magic and compelling thing? Can you tell a story in a way that's going to be, I get it, I get it, I get it really quick. We're used to the drive-through mentality, right? So people aren't going to take very long to get why you're going to do this. So, you know, in terms of testing, there are lots of ways, of course, to test that case for support. And so what you want to do is try to get to the summit through your testing. Now, let me give you an example of one of my favorite examples, actually, of a group that probably had the most, one of the groups that I thought had the biggest challenge in cold fundraising. They were really cold, I will have to say. It was a Boys and Girls Club. It was in a fairly wealthy community, but it was a Boys and Girls Club, and they had never before raised money. And people in that community kind of didn't even know about kids like the kids that would be going to the Boys and Girls Club. They didn't see them on a day-to-day basis, right? They lived in plantations behind gated communities. And so the only way we could sort of relate to them was if, when they were growing up, some of them had actually been members of a Boys and Girls Club. And so one of the things that we did was, and I kept walking around looking for what is the case that these people can understand, that they can get like this, I got it, right now I got it. And so one day I was walking through the club, it was after school, and the teachers were there, and it was a thing called Power Hour. Have you ever, any of you know about Power Hour in Boys and Girls Clubs? Well, it's just so cool. So here were all these kids, and they were crammed into this upstairs, I mean, literally almost sitting on top of each other after school, and it's a learning hour. It's a tutoring hour. And so I walked in, and the kids were going, I know, let me answer. And I went, case of support. Case of support. Because the donors were going to give to education. They were going to give to something that made kids better and smarter. Not just that they had a safe place to go after school, not that they were hungry and by golly they got a snack. I mean, really? But the fact is they were learning and they were excited about learning. So what did we do? The case of support became, on Tuesday afternoon at 3 o'clock, we had volunteers bring potential donors to the Boys and Girls Club, and we walked them through Power Hour. Enough said. There wasn't a dry eye. You didn't have to explain it. We gave them Kool-Aid and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And they gave over and above. It's the most beautiful Boys and Girls Club. It still is the biggest volunteer thing now because there was a reason that you could understand, and you could understand it quickly and with great things. So I'm not going to go through that all over again, but what drives success? Case of support, the first thing was awareness. So I want to go back to this alignment between fundraising and the strategic plan. That's your case for support. That's it. It's got to be buried in there. Now, how you interpret it is another story, but it's buried right here. And as you begin to do your strategic plan, what is your fundraising plan in it? Do you have a clearly articulated fundraising need within your strategic plan? Because that's where you'll find that case of support. So I just wanted to go back to that just for a minute. You also use the case for support to bring your donors on board and to bring your volunteers on board and to lift up your board of directors. So how do you bring that story to life? Well, you bring it to life by doing just what we've talked about. Understanding the strategic plan, beginning to align with the strategic priorities, and building awareness and asking questions within your organization. So I'm going to stop now, Scott, and take a few questions, should there be any.
Absolutely. Do we have any questions in the audience here that we can call on first? Quiet room because you're scared of the online piece.
You like that 20% number, don't you?
Oh, there is. Did I hear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Who's? No? Okay. Okay. Okay.
Oh, wait, we need a microphone
Oh, I'm
first.
sorry. We have a traveling mic coming.
I was on a committee, and the whole point of the people that ran the capital campaign was to simply bring people in to find out who they knew that had money. They did no research, none of these things were done. And of course, it wasn't going to be very successful. But they tried to bring in named people that were known in the community that did squat. And it was just very squat.
Uh-huh.
That means nothing. That means zero. And so I got the impression that rather than doing any investigation on any of the corporate areas that could have, or any of the others, it was simply a case of we need to know the names of the people that we can ask them for big bucks without really any investigation. So it was like, are you kidding me? But that's how they ran it.
Yeah. Well, so that is not an unusual phenomenon because I find that when we go in to work with the volunteers who are going to should be giving you the money first, right? It should be in a concentric circle. You don't need to look 100 miles away. You need to look right in your boardroom, right there with the donors you already have, right there with the staff that you already have. And so real often what has happened is instead of people saying, I'm going to give, they start doing this. And it's, oh, Mr. Daddy Warbucks could give you all of the money at the time. That is the last thing that you do. And so the first thing that you do is evaluate your current leadership. I understand, I see the dynamic all the time. And so you want to evaluate your current leadership. If it is not strong enough, which it often isn't, to have the capacity to drive the giving up to at least 20%, which I truly believe you strive for. You don't always get it, but you strive for it. Then you go find that next circle that you bring in who have the capacity and the interest, and you can build the interest. And in the next section, I'll talk a little bit about how you can build the interest. And because real often, we kind of are a bit cold, right? We're a little bit cold with donors when we get started on a capital campaign. It's not unusual. That Boys and Girls Club I was talking about, I don't think they had 3 donors. So it really was a cold situation. So what we did with that was change up the board before we got started.
thanks. I had a trainer tell me I should do squats, and now I could say that's a bad
Yeah,
thing.
that's
so.
right.
Wayne.
No.
No?
Yes.
June. I'm intrigued by the metrics that you came up with earlier and the correlation, then shall we call the bull factor. But just wondering, what was the sample size of that, and how geographically diverse was it to come up with those numbers?
Great question. So it was a sample of about 150 organizations. Not huge, but our statisticians felt that that was viable for this, and it was in the United States.
Over here? Yeah.
Okay, how do you successfully communicate with your higher ups? All those steps that you said we need to have before we're ready. How do you communicate that effectively? Because I'm in a position in which they're just sort of blown past all of that.
Yeah, and that's really kind of amazing. So one thing I might, not unusual, but amazing. I would try to find a board champion. I would try to find somebody on your board that you can sit and say, you know, I just got back from this conference, and I would like to share with you something that I think is pretty startling, that seems to be something valid as opposed to experiential. This is data. This is not how many did something. This is true regression analysis, analytical data. So they may not like the answer, but they cannot argue with it. And so I will stand here and say, if you go to your board member with that understanding, and if you want a cheat sheet on correlation, call me. Seriously, go find a champion who can get to the higher up, because your board member doesn't want to fail, right? I mean, your job is to keep them from looking really bad. So that's what I do.
Great. We got a question from Twitter that we're going to do.
The question is, does the 20% number assume that does the 20% number assume that the 80-20 rule fills in the rest for the most part?
Okay, so no. Let me go back and explain my 20% rule. When you are operating a fundraising program, and let's say you're going to raise $1 million, let's just use $1 million. What you ideally want to do is have a board positioned to give you $200,000 cumulatively. And so that 20% is simply the amount of the giving by the governing board. Now, if you mean, is the other 80% going to come from a bunch of other people? Yes, but not from the board. So the board is cumulatively giving you 20%. If I misunderstood the question, you can re-ask it on Twitter. My tweet friend could do that.
And we got one last question, and then we'll move on. Thanks.
How do we stress as fundraisers the importance of a really quality strategic plan in the organization? And I'm not just, I mean, it does so much for the organization, but culture, just the priority of fundraising. So people will put fundraising into their strat plans.
Yeah.
But there won't be a vision that actually necessarily capitalizes on what fundraising can do for them. So they get, so I'm sorry, I'm rambling a bit, but they can get mandate focused versus vision focused.
Right.
And stuck within the boundaries of their budget instead of envisioning what can happen beyond their budget. So that's, and then there's the whole culture side. So we talk a lot about philanthropic culture, but if an organizational culture doesn't exist that adopts a strat plan and uses it in their work, how do we advocate as fundraising people to?
Yeah. So your question, I could stand here and answer in an hour and a half, to be perfectly honest. But the number one, and one of the things that's on the handout is the CEO checklist for readiness for a campaign. So I didn't have time to go through all that, but I did give you the handout, which will answer some of those questions. So how do you affect that? I would say, again, it's a CEO relationship, and it's a board champion who gets it. So the very first step in creating a culture of philanthropy is that there are things that are needed that are driven in the community. There's an absence of X. And that feeds into the organization's internal plan. Then it becomes strategic. And the only thing I will quickly say about the difference in a strategic plan and a long-range plan is that a strategic plan must be balanced off of external opinion, or it's not strategic. But again, I wish I could go deeper.
Thank you. And just a couple of reminders for our online folks. The handouts are available on the holding page, so if you didn't get it on the way in, it'll be available for you there. And don't forget the hashtag Banff Compass for all your questions. Thanks, June.
Great. Thank you, Scott. And thanks for the great questions. Okay, so when we look at donors, you know, what we really, again, want to do is say, okay, where are we going to find all these people? And, you know, you don't have to have very many in a capital campaign. For an annual program, you have a lot. It's that bit wide base. Or you have an awful lot in some event-driven thing. But for a capital campaign, most of them are won or lost on less than 500 gifts. You don't have to have thousands of gifts to win a capital campaign. So your focus, if we're going to talk capital, is on probably 2,000 people. So because you're not going to get a yes at the amount that you're asking for every gift. So don't feel like you've got to have 10,000 names because that's useless. You want to really go to that 2,000 names, you know, qualify them, cultivate them, work with them. So this young lady over here has the nicest smile. Every time I look over there, she's nodding her head. That's a really good audience member. Thank you. And so I'm just loving it. So let's talk about another aha. How many of you feel like your community is the richest community in all of Canada? Okay. How many of you feel like your community is the poorest community in all of Canada? How many of you feel like you're somewhere in between? Okay. So every community into which I go, somebody says, but we're different. We are so different. And I go, I know. I know how different you are, and I am taking that into consideration. Well, guess what? In some ways you are. In some ways you are. And so here's the other little aha that came out of this study. And I mean, we fell off of our seats when we got this one back. Now, of course, like any data, you go, well, of course, after you hear it, after you hear the answer, right? Oh, of course, I would have known that. Well, here's the aha. Half of your fundraising success is the amount of wealth available in your community. Do you have enough wealth to do it? So those of you who raised your hands with I'm in the richest community in all of Canada don't have to do everything just perfectly. You can actually stump your toes a little bit. You can actually sort of mess up on one of these categories that I'm talking about. Those of you who are in less wealthy communities have got to do it all right. You got to be better. You got to be better and smarter and quicker and faster because there's not as much money available. Duh. Well, I was just so shocked when this thing happened. So 50% of your success is whether or not the money is available. The other half is all this stuff I'm talking about. So your ability to win is going to depend on how ready you are for the fundraising. So the wealthier it is, and I'm going to give you something that even makes this a little bit more interesting, I hope. So here's something that we worked out for a hospital client. So in our sample, we had a number of hospitals, and obviously we didn't name them here, we just named them by letter. And so what we looked at was the wealth measure factor. So the wealth measure factor, and this, I would love to have this for Canada, actually. I would love to do this data for Canada. But so the wealth measure factor is simply a big old number. And the big old number comes from the per capita income times the population of the community. It's just a number. We had to find some place to measure. So here's the wealth measure factor. So for this institution, which is down here, we looked at relevant numbers. How could we have something as close to their wealth measure factor as we could get? So that would be a way for them to equate. Here's what we did was we analyzed this by funds raised per bed annually. So we simply, these were all in our sample. So you can see the range. In a very similar wealth measure factor, you're ranging from $9,000 a bed down to $2,000 a bed. Same general wealth measure factor, but what a vast difference in the results. Why is that true? Hello? Why do you think that's true? What they did. How good were they at these things that we're talking about? The people that were at $9,000 per bed, I'm going to tell you a story about them in just a minute because it was pretty amazing. So this number of households, we also looked at the number of households with incomes over $150,000. Well, here you've got this $9,000 per bed, but look at the lower number of households with incomes at $150,000 or above. Here's the over $200,000, and then we equalized it per bed. So what we tried to do, this is not a predictor, but it's an example of looking at what might be possible in your wealth measure factor. It's simply a range that gives you a really good step out the door of, well, maybe we can. Maybe we can, and maybe we'll take how we do this a little more seriously. So this was, and I know you don't necessarily have counties unless it's unincorporated, but if you, anyway, I won't go into that, it's too complicated. So let me tell you the story about the one that had the lowest income. This was a hospital, and forgive me for using a North American example, but I think it's relevant. I mean, a United States example. Lumberton, North Carolina. Lumberton, North Carolina has the lowest per capita income, the highest amount of unemployment in the state of North Carolina. It has the lowest per capita income, again. It is 1/3 Caucasian, 1/3 American Indian, and 1/3 African American. It's a very unique community. It's right on the interstate. And when they called about doing a capital campaign, I almost hung up the phone because I was afraid about what they could do. I mean, that's really low. That means wealth measure factor barely eking it out. But you know what? I went in, and it was the most magic place I've ever seen. Their CEO was blockbuster. He had talked frequently and often about the vision and mission of that institution. They had been able to attract physicians, all board-certified physicians. The board had been absolutely primed for 4 years getting ready for this big move to a new hospital. And you know what? They knocked it out of the ballpark. And in the period of time that we worked with them, they did 3 back-to-back campaigns and raised over $12 million in that period of time. And they did it with a smile on their face because they had the vision, they had the dream, and they were the little engine that could. And by golly, they did it. It was the most exciting thing. So those summit things, even if you feel like your competition is so fierce, if you put together these things that I'm talking about readiness, you can win this game. You can do this. It's so exciting when it works. Obviously, leadership is the next thing. You've got to have volunteer leadership. Unfortunately, you have to have volunteer leadership sometimes. You know, it's just the nature of the beast. I'm on a number of boards, as you heard, and sometimes I feel really rotten. I'm on this board of Create-a-thon, which I absolutely adore, and if you ask me in the corner, I will just take you down on the ground and tell you about Create-a-thon because I'm so excited about it. But I'm chairing a campaign for them right now, and I got to get back to the room in a little while and call them because I'm past due on the things I should be doing as a board member, and I feel terrible about that. But the leadership is both internal and external. So number one, is your staff ready? Are you ready? Do you have, does your CEO have the leadership capacity to take you into this with aplomb? Is your board ready? Is your development staff experienced enough? Do they know how to segment, cultivate, move donors down the way? Have they got a proven track record of doing that? Do you have a coach or somebody who's going to help you do that? Do you have enough development staff? Do you need to staff up? If you need to staff up, get ready. Because you cannot win a big campaign, a brand new thing, when your development officer, you, is doing the newsletter, the events, supposed to do all the major gift work, and by the way, get all the board minutes ready for the supporting organization. And so, is your staff ready? Have they been trained? Have you, obviously, I'm preaching to the choir because you're here. But in your organization, is there a belief and an understanding of what will happen if you are ready from a staffing perspective? There was a great presentation. Alex, you and Andrea did a great presentation on Resolve today about how they're getting ready. What are they doing? So you've got to have the staff ready as leadership. And then obviously you've really got to have the volunteers ready. Are they ready? Do they understand, and have they been recruited with the understanding of what is expected of them? If anybody is, the thing I hate the most is when they put a political leader on your campaign cabinet because you think you should just have them. If they are there in name only, if they are an honorary chair, that's exactly what they're going to be. Is they're going to be honorary, and they're going to take up space in your brochure that is not going to help you at all. So if it's honorary and you need their name, you know what people are going to look at? They're going to look at the donor list to see how much that honorary chair gave. They're not, and they're going to respect you less because you've got an honorary chair that didn't step up to the table. So please don't do that. Please only have people who are going to give you money and get you money when you are in a capital campaign. I know that sounds really cold and hard-hearted, but folks, you're not in there for a PR campaign. You're in there to bring it in. So let me give you an example of a recent, just last week, a really exciting thing that happened. We were working with an independent school. The school had never had a $1 million gift from an individual. They're in a $30 million capital campaign. That's a pretty big chunk for a little old school that's never had a $1 million gift given to them before. So in the conversation, here is a person whose daughter was at the school, a single mom, not an impoverished single mom, and she was so appreciative of her daughter's care, and I won't go into the details, but when the capital campaign embarked, she had been giving about $10,000 a year on the annual fund over the last 3 years. A nice gift, but a lot of the parents there give kind of in that range. So you didn't just, she wasn't glaring at you. But the development officer there went, she's been establishing, they've been having lunch together, they've kind of known each other. This daughter had been doing well, and so she went to her and went through the campaign, went through the naming opportunities, went through the reason for it. Her daughter will be an upper school child coming when the school is built, and so she actually asked her for $250,000. And this mother was so appreciative of what had happened that she came back and self-selected as a $1 million giver. Very rare. Very rare does that happen. But that's one of those things where a leader, and she knows 5 or 10 other people who are in her sphere of influence. She doesn't have to be the top donor that's on everybody's wall. This is somebody who's never been on anybody's wall. And she will be so impassioned about being a leader. So sometimes you can have low-profile leaders who can really make a difference, because I believe that no leader should be asked to ask for more than about 5 gifts. I find that they choke on it. If they've got a list of 10 or 12, how are we doing on time? 35 minutes. Okay. So as we begin to look at leaders that can be low profile but can help you, you don't always have to have the most high profile leaders. So it's important that they are ready. Okay, so we talked about awareness, we talked about the case for support, we talked about leadership and that sort of thing. Are you ready? So if you had to say, I don't think we're at a 10 on one of these, then you're going to need to do some strength training. You're going to need to get ready to climb that mountain. And so you want to go back and do a little bit of homework before you jump. I, once upon a time, I thought that you'd had enough negative, challenging messages as we went through this, so I decided not to approach this from how to wreck a campaign. But I do want to tell you that any one of these things can wreck a campaign. Let me give you an example of a very painful wreck. So in my hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, there is the oldest historical African-American YMCA in the country. And they are an inner city Y, and we were asked to work with them to get ready for a capital campaign. They wanted to build a new building. And so the board had been there for quite some time. I mean, a lot of those people had been on that board for 20 years. They didn't do squat, as you would say. Okay. So, wow. I mean, there was nothing more important in my mind. I was very personally invested in this. I really wanted this campaign to happen. And so I talked with some of the leadership, and I said, you know, we're really going to need a leader that's going to knock this out of the ballpark. We need somebody that's instantly credible, who will work feverishly on your behalf, who can make a leadership gift. Are you okay with my helping you recruit this person? It happens to be where I live, right? I can do that easily in my backyard where I couldn't do it somewhere else. You would just say, man with halo, everybody loved, philanthropist, etc. You are the one person, you're the one person who can pull this thing off. And this community will trust you. This African American community will trust you to be part of their mix, because there is a lack of trust, right? In that, at least in my community, there's still a bit of a lack of trust in that situation. So I knew that we needed to have credibility and trust. And so I want this to happen too. And he was the right kind of leader who could have done that. We brought him to the table, and the leadership decided that they didn't want him. Wow. That's how you wreck a campaign, is to have the quintessential leader come to the table. And he's so gracious, he's so lovely, that he would never have issued any statement or made any statement at all. But it was the way to wreck a campaign. We had another campaign that was a multi-area campaign of a young girls organization. And oh my goodness, we had this fabulous chairman who had decided to come in. She was a former Merrill Lynch vice president nationally. She was credible. She had moved back home. She had the wealth. Everybody loved her. She said, yes, I will chair this campaign. Yes, I'm excited about this. The organization refused to do a feasibility study. Not a good idea. They'd never done a capital campaign before. This leader said, she was an entrepreneur, let's just do it anyway. Come on, let's do it. I said, all right, I'm just telling you. This makes me nervous. She said, well, I will lead and I will not give up until it wins. I said, all right, we'll be there. She died 2 days after the campaign started. How to wreck a campaign. She obviously didn't do it on purpose. But it just wrecked the campaign. So there are lots of ways for that to happen. Okay, all right, I'm not going to tell you her name now that you've done that. Okay, so let's have some more questions.
Yeah, great. I think we do have a question from Twitter, so we'll start there as we're getting the mics around the room.
Can a fund development board that operates separately from a board of directors make up the 20% rule, or does it have to be the board itself?
Yes, they can.
Great. In the room?
So the second consecutive question, this is a popular topic that people want to run back to their boards and say, June says.
I know.
Right? But I wonder if and maybe it's a joint question to Scott, if there's, because I know I'm in post-secondary, and I know that in American post-secondary institutions, you have boards of regents that often are 40, 50, 60 persons rather than the 10 or 11 or 12 that we have on our boards here. And since you're talking about 20% of the total dollar amount, I wonder if there's kind of some sort of a less shocking and eye-popping Canadian equivalent where it's 10 or 15, I don't know.
Well, and I'll let Scott pick up on that, but my experience is that you have generally politically appointed governing boards in universities. So I don't know that I should say this out loud, but we kind of discount that group, right? I mean, you're not going to get the same, they aren't there for those reasons. They were not recruited for their giving in that situation. However, almost every school within the university or the college has an advisory board, or they have a volunteer board, or you develop a campaign cabinet. So that cumulative group of volunteer leadership can make up the 20%, and often do.
Bang on.
Okay.
Microphones in the room?
Thanks. I've got a question about case for support. There's actually 3 phases to this. So if you could talk about, should there be a case for support that's unique to the campaign versus just one for the organization? The best way you would suggest that that case should be put together, and how important is it to a campaign?
So I'm going to talk a little bit about 2 ways that we suggest the case be put together in this next segment. So I will answer that. I think it depends, but I do believe that we have gotten to the point that almost a case for support has to be targeted for every audience. It's not one case for support. So there's a overarching case that would be developed for your campaign and your organization, and then there would be segmented cases that are developed depending on what the individual is interested in or the company. Let me give you an example. So in the case for support presentation that I made yesterday, what we talked about was something that we just landed on, which I kind of like. So you have your kind of standard case for support. Here's what we're doing, here's why we exist, here's how we're trying to raise money, here's how much we need, etc. Here's going to be the impact. And then what we have just done is start taking, and you can format it any way you want, but to take a column going down the left-hand side where we actually are putting a picture of the company or of the president or of the individual or of their children or whatever is relevant to the organization, and framing it about why that individual or company or family have anything to do with this campaign. So we're already making the linkage for them. Now, that's not pulled out of the air because there've already been cultivation conversations with these people, right? You already know what they're interested in. So when you go back for your case, so you go out with a generic case, okay, and what are you interested in? Sometimes it's a feasibility study, and you can find it out that way. But you know on your at least your top 50 donors what they're interested in by the time you're ready to make the ask, or you should. And so I'm beginning to be a big fan of not printing a 4-color brochure that's all expensive, but running it off on a laser printer and being able to adapt it to people. So if, let's say, your campaign is, let's just say it's a university campaign, and you're going to go after your agricultural component, then obviously you would pick your top 20 in that component, and you would tailor this case, which you can do very easily today, to that donor. So that's that's a 10 in a case. If you don't have the resources to do that, then you certainly can just put a cover letter on it, or make sure that your volunteers are prompted to shape the case in a very specific way verbally. I hope that answers your question. But I'm going to get into how do you decide.
And one last question over here.
Hi, team. Thanks so
Hi.
much. I wondered if you could just tie, these two things are tied together, if you could talk about the importance of staff, management, executive buy-in into the case. And also, for example, I worked at a faculty where only 1/3 of the faculty supported the capital campaign focus and the challenges that. But then secondly, also the importance of staff, management, executive to be visibly seen as giving to the project. Because we've talked about the importance of the board, but I think if you could just touch on that, that would be helpful.
That's great. Okay, so on the CEO checklist, that's your handout that accompanies this presentation, which is not being covered. I mean, it's alluded to, but it isn't being covered. To me, it would be unconscionable for the CEO and the leadership team not to buy into this, but I do know that that's where it starts. So there should never be a campaign launched until that work has been done, because it's a buzzsaw, it's a wreck waiting to happen. Will 100% of a 5,000 staff university buy into it? No. But certainly if you have 100 staff or 150 staff, you know, all through the ranks, that's the job of the CEO and the development officer to make sure those stories are being told. And one of my favorite ways is, frankly, the best cases come out of the people on the front line. They're the ones that if you have interviewed them, if it's been a part of staff planning, if you have shared it with them, or you simply go back and talk to them. You know, get a staff group together at their staff meeting and say, you know, this is the way we're thinking about this. Does this hit on all cylinders? Because most of the time they can tell a better story. The second part of that is I believe that the staff campaign should be run first. And you certainly want 100%. It's almost heartbreaking to me because every time in a staff campaign, it's the engineers and the food service people that are given the most. And they can't wait to get their pen that's silver instead of gold. You know, it's just lovely. And so, yes, I mean, when you go out to the community and say our staff did 100% toward this, it is one powerful message. And so each of us have to decide, are we ready to write that check? Are we really, and you know, if you're not, then you probably ought to talk to yourself in the mirror first before you even launch, because you've got to believe in it enough to give to it as well.
Thank you, June.
Okay, thanks for those questions. They're really great. So the next real thing is about the plan of action. You know, now that you've got all of these things done, you've got your strategic plan, you're aligned with your fundraising, you've got your CEO on board, you've got your internal staff, you've got your internal board, you've got your internal volunteers. Now you're going external. You're beginning to educate outside. That's what your case for support is really going to help you do. It's a tool, one tool to really help you communicate with those people that are outside those concentric circles. So there's several ways to know if your case is valid. And One of them is a campaign planning study, typically done by a consulting firm. And so you want to know, they go out with your case. That's the document that they use. Most of the time, the case that a consulting firm uses or that you're using is not a finished product. I really prefer them to have draft written all over them so that the people that you're talking with have the opportunity to react to that. And you know at this point, this is not a done deal. When we're doing a campaign study, this is not a done deal. This is, we really do care about your opinions at this point. And so one of the ways to do that is to interview, and everybody does it differently in every constituency. It can be upwards of 500 online questionnaires and 40 face-to-face or whatever the number is. But you've got to do a meaningful number. In my experience, you track after about 15 interviews. The story tracks. And so you do 40, 35, 45, 80, whatever the number is, interviews to validate that tracking of the numbers. But I will tell you that if your budget is low, pick your best 12. The issue is, did you get the right 12? Did you get the right 15? So when you begin to, they will tell you about whether or not your case resonates. They will also tell you about whether it resonates with them. It may resonate as a general thing, but then when it gets down to, so, well, are you willing to work, lead, and give, and if so, how much? That's when the rubber meets the road on the case with the people when you're doing a campaign planning study. The other thing that we have begun to do, particularly with organizations that do not have a backlog of ready donors, is we've started doing, and many of the consulting firms in this room may be doing this as well, is a community-driven planning study. So what that means is we form a task force ahead of time that external, right, the group that might help you make up that 20%, that's who you want on your task force. It's usually small. It's at most 9 to 12, 9 to 11 members. It has a finite amount of time that they are involved. You promise them that you will do no more than 4 meetings unless they wish to do it otherwise. And so the first thing you do with them is take to them not the pretty wordsmith case for support, but an outline of your case. Simply an outline, just like you did in English 101. Put together an outline and put together the components and put together the cost and put together some bullet points on why. Have whoever is best in your organization to make that presentation and to ask them, what do you think? What do you think? Is this valid? Does this resonate? They will then put their thumbprints all over it. They'll change it up and turn it upside down. They'll want it on purple paper. I don't care what they want. I just want to know their opinions, and I want them to buy in. So the next time you get together, you ask them to help you identify the people that they believe would be most likely to want to fund this kind of organization. This is particularly, again, helpful when you don't have a board with that kind of capacity and you're trying to get leadership in that aren't going to serve on your board, but they may well help you in a short-term situation. So you go through with them, again, you take back what they suggested to you as a change, outline only, to the task force, and you also work through the people that they believe would be most likely. Now, you could get some of these wild card people that aren't going to, could care less about you. I have one philanthropist friend who is human services only, and she says, I don't know why the aquarium keeps coming back. I don't like fish. So you have to begin to work through this. The third meeting then is generally taking back, okay, we've now researched these people. These are the people that are donors with us that you've suggested. You begin to qualify. You now take them back a little bit more meat on the case for support, but you do not allow them to wordsmith the case. No committee gets to wordsmith the case. I know that that's hard to do, but it really should not be written by committee. The ideas can come through committee. So the community-driven planning study, then, you go through the typical campaign planning study at that point, and then the task force is invited back to hear the results of that study first, and they say thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down, change it up. They do not have a vote. but they have influence. Because, why? That's the group that you're hoping is going to make up the difference in your 20%. And this is the way you cultivate them short term, give them great value, great input, great involvement, and it's just amazing how well that works. So, if you just simply do all this stuff I just talked about, I know how easy it is, you're not going to wreck your campaign. You're going to be successful. So try to take a deep breath. Try to get your senior leadership. Try to get some board champions. Find champions within. It can be a faculty champion. It can be a physician champion. You know, it can be a community champion. It could be we've got the Nature Conservancy here. It could be a conservation champion. So get yourself a buddy who has influence and start helping to educate them along the way so that you don't embarrass them at the end of the rainbow. They don't want to fail. You don't want to fail. You want to win, and there's nothing more exciting than a campaign that wins. It is just a blast. You have this great celebration ceremony, everybody's exciting, and then something new and wonderful is happening in your community, and it's all because you went through the process. You took your time, and you made sure that you're not out there stumping your toes. So I would just say that having a great plan and going through all these processes is just imperative for your success. So I'm happy to take more questions.
Absolutely. We have questions in the room. Any questions, holdovers from the last go-around too? Because this is our final question period in the session, right?
I'd be curious if I answered your question about the case for support.
One additional one I could put is just how
We need a microphone, just
Yeah,
hold
sorry.
a second, thanks.
I understand the feedback loop with the community members and getting them involved, but the initial creation of that, just to give it the most power you can give it within your organization, how broad do you involve people in your organization for building that case, and with that helping to understand what that is and feel
That's a
like
great
they
point.
would support it?
What is your organization, just so I... what type?
Victoria Symphony.
Okay, symphony. All right, well, actually I was on a symphony board, so I can kind of answer that, I think, a little bit, and I'll give you something a little bit specific that may play over to everybody. So on a symphony board, you have the business heads and you have the artistic heads, right? So the artistic heads want to do all this grand music and the best venues and all that. And the business heads are saying, can we afford it? So in your strategic planning, as you begin to bring your business and your artistic heads together, you want to begin to look at what's next. Why do you need to do this capital campaign in the plan? So that starts with top leadership, and it starts internally with your staff. So both your artistic and your business leaders within your staff have to have this conversation to say, what's most important? Where do we need to go? So that's where the case starts, is deciding what's your future, what's your vision. So that starts with, I don't know how you're formed, but a director or a manager, or general manager, or whatever your symphony has, or whatever your organization has. That internal audience it knows it best. You know what you need to do better than anybody else, and so you should. So that's the very start of the case of support. Once you have your strategic plan, then you talk about how much can we earn for our envisioned future, how much can we earn, how much can we borrow, and how much do we need to be given to achieve what it is we want to do. That's the second phase of that. Then once that phase has happened, then you begin to embellish those components. So if we, on the be given part in particular, it may be that part of that earned income is seats filled. How are we going to increase the number of people in seats? That's our earned income. And so our be given income is what is going to happen exponentially because we have been given this information. So most of that is all internal, and that's how you get the meat of your case for support. Once then, if you need a case writer, there are many people in the community or in your professional community who are professional case writers. And, Tom Ahern's a great one that we talked about. These consulting firms have good case writers. You probably have good writers. So I would say go to them and download the presentation that I did on case for supports, which would give you all the meat. But basically, it starts with vision, and it goes down to what's exciting and compelling. So that's how the case is best built.
We have a question in the room here.
June, how do we deal with, eventually it comes up, the issue of your annual donors, and how do they fit into the capital, and is that their gift, or when do you start to address that in your planning?
Yeah, that's so important. So your annual fund, your annual gifts typically fund your operations, right? Here's my bias, is that I am so sick of the name annual fund. I think it is just boring, dull, meaningless words. Nobody cares about meeting your annual fund. I think you should throw the word out, number one. However, with that bias having been said, I don't know the substitute word yet. But it's important. We know that. But we just sort of have it because we have it, and we ask people to fund our annual fund. All right, so you've got your annual fund. They're very important. You don't want them to go away. So the rule of thumb is 10 times annual. So you could kind of say in a capital campaign, we could probably do 10 times annual. So if you think personally, I want you to think for a moment of yourself. Think about, for just a moment, the organizations to whom you give an annual gift. Is it just a one-off, or is it a stop-and-think gift, whatever that is for you? And then if they went into a capital campaign, would you be willing to give 10 times that annual gift to them on a capital campaign? I think you have to think about it like that, because I think there are a lot of people who are annual givers, and that's their stretch. I think there are annual givers that are hidden down in your group that could do 80 times what they're doing. And so you have to know individually. So you don't want to cannibalize your annual fund, but you've got to take that into consideration. And I would say, again, because the capital campaign is won or lost on about 500 gifts. So look, depending on the number of annual gifts you have, look at those top 500 in terms of not only amount, but in sequence of giving, how many years have they been giving, and then start cultivating them to see if they're willing to step out, or are you going to leave it? Because then you're going to have to go deeper into your annual fund to find those that are going to make it up. I hope that was specific enough.
We got a question from Twitter.
Any comments about post-campaign follow-through and fatigue?
Oh, yes. Oh. Well, the good thing about consultants is they get to run when it's over. No, I'm kidding. Yes. So, that gift is only the beginning. And most of you were probably here for the donor panel on the first night. How heartbreaking for somebody to say that they weren't thanked, or that they had forgotten, or they had been they fell through the cracks. So the best organizations right now are building a stewardship staff. They are, fortunately the universities and hospitals are big enough to do that. But that is, in my mind, if you have a great database, I think it's very important that your record keeping is impeccable. That probably won't happen because somebody changed. And so this is a place where you can really use your volunteers if you organize them. There's nothing more lovely than a volunteer board member writing a personal note to people periodically. So one of the things we do with boards that we work with, and there's a more specific question that they're asking, but here's an example, is we have a list of donors with their addresses at every board meeting with thank you notes sitting around the table. Pick out somebody you know, write them. I don't care if 3 people write them a note. That's okay. You can have a thankathon. You can extend your staff, because most of you will not have the luxury of having a stewardship staff. If you have that luxury, bank on it, because that's how you're going to get the next wave of donors. Is next time you're going to have another capital campaign. This is not going to be the last one. And so if you don't steward those donors properly, you're going to really run into donor fatigue. And people are really worn out. I'm finding a lot of donor fatigue, frankly, because they're being asked so much. The same people are being asked so often. It's the carving out of the new people. And then just saying thank you. It's not hard. It's a phone call. It's a note from your president, but it needs to be structured. And so I do empathize with the tweet friend about the importance of stewardship. So if you can, build a staff and build a program. If you cannot, find a way. Find a way to engage donors, to engage other staff members. There are nurses in hospitals now that write personal notes every time a patient leaves. And so you can find a way to begin to extend that message.
So thank you, June.
Thank you.
I think we're, is there one more question? Okay, we'll do one more.
I'm just wondering if you can speak briefly to your experience, pitfalls to avoid or whatever, in dealing with a campaign that will overarch either significant organizational transition or leadership transition.
Help me understand your question.
A campaign that will, if there's going to be a significant change in how your organization functions, or in sort of top executive leadership or whatever, that is going to occur during the course of the campaign.
Well, that kind of stinks. You know, it brings up questions in the donors' minds. So it really depends on, are they glad that leadership transition is happening, or are they sad that leadership transition is happening? I will tell you that the very first campaign that I ever did as a staff person, we went through 3 CEO changes. And because of our volunteer leadership, it didn't miss a beat. So the volunteer leadership was credible enough to stay the course, and it did not impact it. Of course, we kind of didn't talk about it either. The transition in what the institution is doing, in terms of, are they going to have a new culture, are they going to go off on a divergent path and it's not part of the campaign? I think you have to be transparent enough to pull back. I wouldn't keep going, or I would be very honest with every donor and go back and talk with them and restructure your campaign message. And I hope I understood that. Okay, thank you.
So, June, thank
Yes,
you for reinforcing
thank you.
best practice and especially proving out best practice.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you for letting me be here. Thank you.
We will, I've got a thank you card and everything that I left on the chair over there, but since I'm live from coast to coast,
Stewardship, what are we going to do?
But thank you very much. And I do want to thank again Mackenzie Investments, who helped to support this, as well as every donor to the Every Member campaign. These are not only enjoyed by you, but often by up to 1,000 or more in the future, because we do provide the recording of this as well, so some were live and the recording will be sent out across Canada in future communications from the foundation. So thank you very much, June. With that, I want to thank the online viewers. We'll be closing off the webinar now,